"Do not let her stand," the Alpha King whispered to the empty throne, "because if she carries my dead mate's soul, the moon has lied to me twice." Claire Bennett woke to that voice before she understood she was alive. Cold stone pressed against her cheek. Candle smoke drifted through the air like gray silk. Somewhere above her, hundreds of wolves were breathing in perfect, frightened silence. She opened her eyes and saw black marble steps rising toward a throne carved with silver wolves, their mouths open as if they had been frozen mid-howl. Her fingers twitched against the floor. A thin ceremonial chain circled her wrist, loose enough not to hurt, but heavy enough to tell her she had not come here freely. She tried to remember her name, her home, the road that had brought her under that throne, but her mind gave her only fragments: rain on white roses, a woman humming in the dark, and a flash of moonlight so bright it felt like waking inside a dream. "Who is she?" someone hissed. "An Omega," another voice answered, sharp with disgust. "Look at her dress. Look at the mark." Claire looked down. Her pale gown was torn at the hem and stained with dust from travel she could not remember. Beneath her collarbone, just above her heart, a faint silver crescent glowed under her skin. It pulsed once, soft and quiet, like it had heard the room speak. The crowd recoiled. Claire pushed herself up on trembling hands. The hall stretched around her in a blur of torches, dark banners, polished armor, and faces that stared as if she were not a girl but a warning sent from the sky. At the far end, beneath the highest arch, stood the man whose voice had woken her. Mason Blackwood did not look like grief. Grief was supposed to bend people. It was supposed to make them smaller. He stood tall and still in a black formal coat, broad-shouldered, pale-skinned, with silver-gray eyes fixed on her as if one wrong breath from her could reopen a wound he had spent years pretending was closed. Behind him, a covered portrait rested beneath a black veil, surrounded by white roses. Claire did not know why the sight of those flowers made her chest ache. "Your Majesty," a blonde woman near the dais said, stepping forward with perfect confidence. "This is a curse-born stray. She appeared during the memorial. On this night, of all nights. She should be removed before the pack panics." The woman's name was spoken in whispers around Claire: Vanessa Hale. Beautiful. Noble. Untouchable. Vanessa looked at Claire the way polished silver might look at mud. Claire tried to speak, but her throat tightened. "I don't know how I got here," she managed. Her voice was small, but it carried. Mason's expression changed so quickly most would have missed it. Not softness. Not mercy. Recognition, buried under fear. His wolf heard something in her voice that his face refused to admit. The silver crescent beneath Claire's skin warmed. Mason took one step down from the throne. The entire hall stopped breathing. "Say that again," he ordered. Claire swallowed, fighting the strange pull in her chest, the impossible feeling that she had once known the rhythm of his footsteps. "I don't know who I am." Mason's jaw tightened. Vanessa's hand curled at her side. Somewhere in the crowd, an old healer covered her mouth as if she had just seen a ghost. The black veil over the portrait stirred though no wind moved through the hall. Claire turned toward it without meaning to. Beneath the veil, the hidden face seemed to call to her, not with words, but with grief. Mason saw her look. His eyes darkened. "No," he said, but it sounded less like a command than a plea. Claire's mark flared brighter, silver light slipping through the hall and touching the white roses at the portrait's base. One by one, the closed buds opened. Gasps rippled through the pack. Vanessa stepped back as if the flowers had accused her. Claire pressed a hand to the glowing mark, terrified by the warmth beneath her palm. Mason came down another step, and this time his voice shook. "Where did you get that mark?" Claire looked up at him, lost, frightened, and unable to lie. "I woke up with it." The torches flickered. The old healer whispered a name Claire did not recognize, but Mason did. His face went still, the kind of stillness that comes before a heart breaks all over again. Liana, he breathed. And at the sound of that name, Claire's silver mark answered like it had been waiting for him. The name fell into the hall like a glass dropped in silence, and for one suspended breath, no one moved. Claire did not know the woman Mason had named, yet the sound of it slipped under her skin with a strange, aching familiarity. Liana. It trembled through her like a memory she had not earned. The silver mark beneath her fingers cooled, then warmed again, as if answering him in a language her body understood before her mind could. Mason stared at her with a fury that looked almost like pain. "Take her to the lower east chamber," he said, his voice low enough to quiet every whisper. "She is not to be harmed. She is not to be questioned without me present." Vanessa's eyes flashed. "Your Majesty, with respect, she appeared beneath your throne during your Luna's memorial. The pack will see this as an omen." "Then let them see that I still rule this pack," Mason replied. He did not raise his voice, but every wolf in the room seemed to remember how to stand still. Claire felt two guards approach, not roughly, but with the cautious distance people kept from things they did not understand. She rose on unsteady feet. The chain around her wrist slid against the marble with a soft sound that made Mason's gaze drop. Something tightened in his face. "Remove that," he ordered. One guard unlocked the chain at once. Claire rubbed her wrist, surprised by the sudden sting of emotion in her throat. It was such a small mercy. Almost nothing. Yet in a room where everyone looked at her like a threat, that one command felt like a hand held over a candle flame. Vanessa stepped closer as Claire passed. Her perfume was sweet, sharp, expensive. "You should have stayed wherever the moon forgot you," she murmured, too softly for the hall but not for Claire. "Girls like you do not survive royal grief." Claire looked at her, fear still fluttering in her chest, but something quieter and stronger rose beneath it. "I am not trying to take anything from you." Vanessa smiled without warmth. "That is what makes you dangerous." The guards led Claire through a side corridor lined with old portraits and narrow windows. Outside, the Blackwood estate spread across rolling hills and dark pine woods, its stone walls silvered by moonlight. She could see wolves moving across the grounds, some in human form, some only shadows near the tree line. Every face turned as she passed. Every whisper followed. "Stray Omega. Curse-born. False Luna." Claire kept her eyes forward even as her legs threatened to shake. She had no past, no pack, no proof that she belonged anywhere. But the white roses had opened for her. The veiled portrait had called to something inside her. And the Alpha King had looked at her like she was both impossible and unbearable. The lower east chamber was not a prison, though it felt like one when the door closed behind her. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, a small fireplace, and a window overlooking the courtyard. A tray of water and bread waited on the table. Claire touched the bread but could not eat. Her reflection in the dark window startled her, pale skin, wide grey-blue eyes, brown hair tangled around her shoulders, and that silver crescent glowing faintly beneath her collarbone. She looked ordinary. Frightened. Human, almost. Then a soft knock came. An elderly woman entered before Claire could answer, carrying a leather medical bag. Her silver hair was braided over one shoulder, and her eyes were kind in a way that made Claire's guard weaken at once. "My name is Ruth Whitaker," she said. "I am the healer here." Claire stepped back. "Are you here to test me?" Ruth's gaze lowered to the mark, then quickly returned to Claire's face. "No, child. I am here to make sure fear has not convinced this pack to forget its manners." That almost broke her. Claire looked away, blinking hard. Ruth examined her wrist, checked her pulse, and asked simple questions Claire could not answer. Where was she born? Who were her parents? What was the last thing she remembered before waking? Each blank space inside Claire felt larger than the room. At last, Ruth sat beside her and spoke softly. "That mark is older than any trick Vanessa Hale could name. Claire's breath caught. Do you know what it is? Ruth hesitated, and in that hesitation, Claire heard the shape of a secret. Before the healer could answer, a sound rose from the courtyard below, a small, frightened cry. Claire moved to the window. Near the rain barrel, a young wolf pup crouched with one paw caught in a silver training loop, trembling as several older wolves laughed nervously, unwilling to touch the metal. Claire did not think. She ran for the door. Ruth called her name, but Claire was already moving down the corridor, pulled by a pain that was not hers and a mercy she could not explain. Claire reached the courtyard before she understood how fast she had moved. The night air struck her face, cool and damp with the scent of pine, rain, and stone. Torches burned along the training yard, their flames bending in the wind, throwing long shadows over the packed earth. Near the rain barrel, the wolf pup trembled in a silver loop, its small body tucked low, one paw caught in the shining restraint used for practice drills. The older wolves around it had gone quiet when Claire appeared. They stared at her the same way the hall had stared, with suspicion wrapped around fear. Do not touch that, one young man warned. Silver is not for omegas. Claire barely heard him. The pup looked up at her with amber eyes too young to understand pride or rank. It only knew pain. It only knew no one had come close enough to help. Something in Claire's chest opened, soft and fierce. It is all right, she whispered, kneeling several feet away so she would not frighten it. I am here. The silver crescent beneath her collarbone gave a faint pulse. The pup stopped shaking. Behind her, someone muttered, she is doing it again. Claire stretched out her hand. The training loop glowed cold under the torchlight, and some buried instinct told her it would hurt to touch it. She touched it anyway. A sharp chill rushed up her fingers, not burning, not breaking, only forcing a gasp from her lips. She pressed her other hand over the clasp and felt the metal loosen as if it had been waiting for permission. The loop fell open. The pup stumbled forward into her arms. Claire gathered it gently against her chest, one hand shielding its small paw, the other smoothing the damp fur along its back. You are safe, she breathed. A hush rolled through the courtyard. The mark on Claire's chest brightened until its silver light spilled over the pup's injured paw. Under her palm, the trembling eased. The pup gave one soft sigh and tucked its face beneath her chin. Claire froze. She had no idea what she had done. All she knew was that the little creature was no longer afraid. From the far archway, Mason Blackwood watched without speaking. He had come after Ruth's hurried warning, expecting disorder, perhaps another staged panic by Vanessa's circle. He had not expected this. Not Claire kneeling in the moonlit dirt with a frightened pup held like something precious. Not the silver light around her hands. Not the scent that rose when the rain touched her hair. White roses after a storm. Mason gripped the stone arch beside him until his knuckles whitened. That scent had not existed in his world for 3 years. He had burned the last of Liana's letters because he could not bear how they still smelled faintly of it. He had sealed her rooms. Ordered the gardens replanted. Forbidden her name from court except on memorial nights. And now an unknown Omega with no memory carried that impossible fragrance like the moon had placed it in her lungs. Claire looked up and saw him. The courtyard seemed to shrink to the space between them. Mason's expression was controlled, but his eyes were not. They held anger, disbelief, and something so wounded Claire felt it before she understood it. The pup in her arms gave a small whimper and pressed closer. I only wanted to help, Claire said. Her voice shook, but she did not lower her gaze. Vanessa stepped from the shadows beside Mason, her cloak immaculate, her mouth curved with concern too polished to be kind. Your Majesty, this is exactly what I feared. She is influencing the young now. The pack will think she has power over them. Ruth arrived behind Claire, slightly breathless. Or they will think she has compassion, which appears to be rarer here tonight than magic. A few wolves looked away. Vanessa's smile thinned. Mason descended the courtyard steps. Every conversation died. He stopped a few feet from Claire, close enough for her to feel the weight of him, not touching, not gentle, but unable to stay away. "What did you do to the silver?" he asked. Claire looked down at the open loop on the ground. "I do not know." "What did you do to the pup?" "I held him." "That is not an answer." Her eyes lifted to his. "It is the only one I have." For a moment, the hard line of Mason's face faltered. The same words. The same defiant honesty. Liana had once stood in this very courtyard, cradling an injured stray fox while noble wolves complained about ruined ceremony flowers, and when Mason had asked why she cared so much, she had looked at him and said, "Because no one else did." He had loved her from that moment and lost her before he knew how to survive loving anyone. Claire shifted, and the pup licked her wrist. A faint laugh escaped her, small and startled. The sound moved through Mason like sunlight through a locked room. His wolf surged so suddenly he had to step back. Vanessa noticed. So did Ruth. So did Claire, though she did not know what it meant. Mason turned his gaze toward the watching pack. "No one is to call her curse-born again." Vanessa went still. "Your Majesty." "No one," he repeated. Then his eyes returned to Claire, colder now because softness frightened him more than rage ever had. "At dawn, we test the mark." Claire held the pup closer as the silver crescent under her skin pulsed once, bright and certain, as if it already knew what the dawn would reveal. By dawn, the Blackwood estate had changed from a place of mourning into a place of judgment. Claire stood at the center of the Eastern ritual court with Ruth at her side and the rescued pup sitting quietly near her feet, as if the little wolf had decided she belonged to him before anyone else could decide she did not. The court was open to the pale morning sky, surrounded by stone columns carved with old moon symbols and the names of every Luna who had ever protected the pack. Claire's borrowed gray dress was too plain for the setting, too soft against all that black stone and silver tradition, but she kept her shoulders straight. She had learned in one night that fear did not leave simply because you wished it away. It stayed. You carried it. You walked anyway. Mason stood across from her with the council gathered behind him. In daylight, he looked even more unreachable, his dark hair touched by the cold shine of morning, his formal coat buttoned high, his face unreadable. Only his eyes betrayed him. They kept falling to the mark beneath Claire's collarbone, then away, as if looking too long cost him something. Vanessa moved among the council members in a cream-colored cloak, her voice low and smooth, offering concern like a cup of poison no one could prove was dangerous. "The pack deserves certainty," she said at last, turning toward Mason. "If the girl is innocent, the silver fire will prove it. If she is not, we will know before her influence spreads." Claire heard several wolves murmur in agreement. Ruth's hand tightened around her medical bag. "Silver fire is not meant for frightened girls with no memory," she said. Vanessa gave her a pleasant look. "It is meant for truth." At the center of the court, a shallow circle of pale stones had been arranged around a small blue-white flame. It gave no smoke. It made no sound. Yet Claire felt it watching her. Mason's jaw flexed. "She will not be forced." The word startled the court, and Claire most of all. Vanessa blinked once. "Then what is the point of law, Your Majesty, if an unknown Omega can simply refuse it?" Claire looked at Mason, then at the waiting circle. She thought of the pup trembling in the silver loop, of the white roses opening beneath the veiled portrait, of the way everyone kept asking what she was instead of who she was. Her voice came out quiet, but clear. "I will do it." Mason's eyes sharpened. "Claire." It was the first time he had said her name. Not Liana. Not Stray. Not Curseborn. Her name. Something inside her steadied. "If I keep running from what I do not know, they will keep using my fear against me." Ruth whispered, "Child, you do not owe them pain." Claire looked at the healer with gratitude. No. But I owe myself the truth. She stepped toward the circle. The cold from the silver fire brushed her skin before she reached it. Around her, the pack leaned forward. Vanessa's face remained calm, but her hands were clasped too tightly. Mason moved as if to stop Claire, then forced himself still. She entered the ring. The blue-white flame rose. A gasp swept through the court. But the fire did not touch her. It bent away from her feet, lowering like tall grass in a summer wind. Claire stood in the center as silver light climbed around her, not trapping her, not judging her, but recognizing her. The crescent mark beneath her collarbone brightened until the carved names on the columns began to glow one by one. Ruth covered her mouth. Mason went completely still. The last name to shine was the one nearest the throne arch, carved deep into white stone. Lyanna Blackwood. Claire saw it, and the world tilted. For one heartbeat, she was no longer in the court. She was running through rain with white roses crushed beneath her shoes. She was laughing beside a fountain while Mason watched her like he had forgotten the world was cruel. She was standing beneath a blood-red moon, promising someone she would find her way back if the darkness ever took her name. Then the vision snapped. Claire stumbled, and Mason was there before she fell, his hands hovering near her shoulders but not claiming the right to touch. "What did you see?" he asked, and his voice had lost its armor. Claire looked up at him, shaken by memories that felt borrowed and yet painfully close. "Rain," she whispered. "White roses. You were there." Mason's breath caught. Behind him, Vanessa stepped backward. It was only one step, but Claire saw it. So did Ruth. The silver fire sank into embers, and the court erupted into stunned whispers. Mason turned slowly toward Vanessa, not accusing her yet, not aloud, but the first crack had opened. Claire pressed a trembling hand over her mark. For the first time since waking beneath the throne, she understood that the pack was not afraid because she was powerless. They were afraid because the truth inside her was beginning to remember its own name. The whispers did not end after the silver fire. They followed Claire back through the eastern corridor, slipped beneath doorways, and trembled behind every bowed head that pretended not to stare. By noon, half the Blackwood estate had decided she was a miracle, and the other half had decided miracles were simply curses wearing prettier names. Claire sat in the lower east chamber with the rescued pup asleep beside the fireplace, its small paw tucked beneath its chin. Ruth had brought her tea with honey and a clean blue dress, saying the color might help the court remember she was a person and not a question. Claire had tried to thank her, but the words had tangled with the memory of white roses and rain. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mason younger, softer, standing beside a fountain with moonlight caught in his hair. She did not know if the memory belonged to her or to the woman whose name had glowed on the stone. That was the cruelest part. She could feel pieces of Lyanna inside her like music heard through a wall, but she was still Claire. She still had her own heartbeat, her own fear, her own hands curled around a warm cup she barely remembered lifting. A knock came, and Ruth opened the door before Claire could rise. Mason stood outside. No guards. No counsel. Only the Alpha King, silent and grim, holding a folded black cloak over one arm. Ruth gave him a long look. "Do not frighten her more than this day already has." Mason accepted the warning without pride. "I need to speak with her." Claire nodded, and Ruth left the door partly open behind her, a small kindness that Mason noticed. He stepped inside but remained near the entrance, as if distance were the only courtesy he trusted himself to offer. "The council wants you moved to the North Tower," he said. Claire's fingers tightened around the cup. "Is that a prison?" "It is a protected room. That is what powerful people call rooms when the lock is on the outside." His eyes flickered. Not anger. Pain, maybe, because she had spoken gently and still struck truth. "I will not lock you away." She searched his face. Then why are you here? Mason looked toward the sleeping pup, and for one moment the hardness in him eased. Because when Liana was alive, she believed the smallest frightened creature in a room told you the truth about everyone else in it. If people stepped over it, she remembered. If they helped it, she remembered that. 2. Claire's chest warmed with a sadness that did not feel entirely her own. Did she say that to you? Many times. His voice lowered. Usually when I had failed the test. A fragile silence settled between them. It should have made him seem less dangerous, that small confession, but instead it made him more real. Claire looked down at the crescent mark. I am not trying to be her. Mason's gaze returned to her face, sharp with something like guilt. I know. Do you? He had no answer. Before either of them could speak again, bells rang from the west courtyard, 3 clear notes that made Mason turn at once. Ruth appeared in the doorway, her expression tight. The council has called assembly without you. Mason's face went cold. Claire stood, her tea forgotten. From the corridor came the rising sound of voices, not panicked, but hungry for certainty. Mason moved first, and Claire followed because hiding had never protected her from judgment. The west courtyard was already crowded when they arrived. Vanessa stood at the center beside Lord Hale, her father, a silver-haired councilman with a calm face and watchful eyes. On a table before them lay the open training loop from the night before, now wrapped in white cloth. Vanessa turned as Claire entered, her expression sorrowful enough to fool anyone who wanted to be fooled. I did not wish to bring this before the pack, she said, but truth must come before sentiment. Mason's voice cut through the courtyard. You called assembly without your king. Lord Hale bowed slightly. We called it for your protection, your majesty. Vanessa lifted the cloth from the training loop. The silver metal gleamed faintly, marked with a dark crescent symbol that had not been visible before. Several wolves gasped. This is not ordinary silver, Vanessa announced. It bears a binding mark. The stray Omega did not free the pup from danger. She created the danger, then staged a rescue to win sympathy. Claire felt the courtyard tilt around her. That is not true. Vanessa looked at her with practiced pity. You have no memory. How would you know? The word struck deeper than an accusation because they touched the one wound Claire could not defend. She had no past to hold up as proof. No family. No witness. Only a mark that frightened them and memories that arrived like broken glass. Mason stepped in front of her, but Claire moved beside him instead of behind him. Her hands trembled, yet her voice did not. I know because fear does not make kindness false. The courtyard quieted. The pup, who had followed Ruth outside, limped to Claire and pressed against her skirt. The simple trust in that small gesture softened a few faces, but not Vanessa's. Lord Hale lifted his chin. Then submit to a memory rite. Let the moon show us what you were doing before you appeared in the throne hall. Ruth inhaled sharply. A memory rite on someone already fractured could bury what little of herself she has left. Mason's answer was immediate. Denied. Vanessa's eyes glittered. If she refuses, the pack will always wonder. Claire looked from Mason to Ruth, then to the wolves waiting to decide what kind of story she would become. Her mark pulsed beneath her skin, steady as a second heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside, a woman's voice whispered through rain and roses, do not fear the door. Fear the hand that tries to keep it closed. Claire lifted her head. I will do the right, she said. Mason turned toward her, stunned. Vanessa smiled too quickly. And in that moment, Claire knew the memory they were about to open was the one Vanessa feared most. The memory rite was prepared in the old Moon Chapel, a quiet stone room beneath the western wing where the air smelled of cedar, rainwater, and burned sage. Claire stood before a shallow basin filled with silver-clear water, her hands folded so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Around her, the council formed a half-circle. Ruth remained at her right side, close enough to catch her if fear became too heavy. Mason stood to her left, silent, watchful, and colder than the chapel walls, but Claire had begun to understand that his coldness was not emptiness. It was restraint. It was a man holding back a storm because he did not know who it would hurt if he let it loose. Vanessa watched from beside Lord Hale, her face calm, though her eyes had not left Claire's mark. Since they entered. The right will show what the moon allows, Ruth warned. Not what the curious demand. Lord Hale inclined his head. Then let the moon speak. Claire looked into the basin. Her reflection trembled on the water, pale face, grey-blue eyes, brown hair falling over the borrowed blue dress, silver crescent glowing like a secret that had grown tired of hiding. "What do I do?" she asked. Ruth's voice softened. "Touch the water and hold on to your name." Claire glanced at Mason. He was already looking at her. Not at the mark. Not at the memory of Liana. At her. "Claire Bennett," he said quietly, as if placing the name in the room where no one could take it from her. Her throat tightened. She touched the water. Cold light rushed up her arm. The chapel vanished. She was standing in a garden at night, though she knew she was not truly there. White roses climbed over stone arches. Rain fell in soft silver lines. A woman moved ahead of her, dressed in pale blue, her hair dark and loose down her back. Claire could not see her face, but she felt her sorrow like a hand pressed to her heart. Then Mason appeared in the memory, younger by grief if not by years, standing beneath the roses with a softness in his eyes that made Claire ache. "Liana," he said, and the woman turned. The basin water rose in the chapel, shaping the vision in the air for everyone to see. Gasps trembled through the council. Claire watched Liana smile at Mason, watched him take her hand with the reverence of someone touching his only safe place in the world. Then the scene shifted. The garden darkened. The roses closed. Liana stood alone near the old fountain, one hand over the same place where Claire's crescent mark now glowed. Vanessa appeared at the edge of the memory, younger, dressed in white, her expression bright with false concern. Beside her stood Lord Hale. He carried a small silver box covered in moon symbols. Claire felt Mason go utterly still beside her in the chapel. In the memory, Liana took a step back. No one shouted. No one struck. There was no violence, only betrayal wrapped in ceremony. Lord Hale opened the box, and a pale mist rose from it, circling Liana like winter. Breath. Vanessa spoke words Claire could not hear, but she could read the shape of them on the air. The Luna must fade so the bloodline can be corrected. Liana pressed both hands to her mark. The silver crescent flared. She did not fight with claws or rage. She closed her eyes and made a choice. A second light bloomed around her, warmer, gentler, refusing to be swallowed. Claire felt the woman's voice move through the memory, through the chapel, through her own bones. "If my name is taken, let my soul be hidden where pride will never look. Let me return among the lowest, so the truth may rise without a crown." The water shuddered. Liana's light broke apart into thousands of silver sparks, and one spark flew straight toward Claire. She cried out as the chapel returned around her. The basin cracked down the center, spilling moonlit water across the floor. For a long moment, no one spoke. Mason's face had lost all color. Lord Hale stared at the broken basin as if it had betrayed him. Vanessa's perfect calm had finally disappeared. "That was illusion," she said, but her voice sounded too thin to carry the lie. Ruth stepped forward, eyes bright with anger and grief. "No. That was a soul-binding memory, witnessed by the moon and shown before the council." Claire swayed, and Mason caught her before she fell, his hands steady at her arms, careful but no longer distant. The moment he touched her, the dead mate bond scar across his wrist glowed beneath his sleeve, bright enough for everyone to see. Claire looked down at it, stunned. Mason did too. The silver light from his wrist reached toward the crescent on her chest like two halves of the same prayer. The chapel filled with whispers, but Claire heard only Mason's breath as it broke. "You came back," he said, the words barely more than air. Claire looked up at him, tears burning in her eyes, confused by grief that was hers and not hers, by love that frightened her because it had survived without asking permission. "I do not know how," she whispered. Mason's voice trembled, but his hands remained gentle. "Then we find out together." Behind them, the chapel doors opened by themselves, and from the courtyard beyond came a sound no one expected, every wolf pup in Blackwood crying toward the sky as the morning moon appeared in daylight. The daylight moon hung above Blackwood like a secret finally refusing to stay buried. Its pale shape shimmered in the morning sky, visible against the blue as every wolf pup across the estate cried upward, not in fear, but in recognition. Claire stood in the chapel doorway with Mason's hand still steady at her arm, and for one breath she forgot the council, Vanessa, Lord Hale, and the broken basin behind her. The sound from the courtyard passed through her like a lullaby she had once known. The rescued pup broke away from Ruth and ran to Claire, pressing against the hem of her blue dress. More pups gathered near the chapel steps, their small faces lifted toward her, their tails low and calm. The adult wolves watched in stunned silence. In werewolf law, the young were believed to sense truth before pride could distort it. They did not bow for titles. They did not respond to politics. They answered only to safety. Ruth whispered, "The children remember the luna's light." Claire looked down at the pups, her throat tight. "I am not her. Not completely." Mason heard her, and the quiet pain in his expression softened into something deeper. "No," he said. "You are not only her." Those words did more to steady Claire than any declaration could have. All morning, the pack had looked at her as proof, threat, miracle, or ghost. Mason looked at her now as a woman trying not to disappear inside someone else's memory. The silver scar on his wrist still glowed beneath the edge of his sleeve, and Claire's crescent answered in gentle pulses. Every time the two lights brightened together, the air filled faintly with the scent of white roses after rain. Lord Hale stepped from the chapel behind them, his council robes damp at the hem from the spilled moon water. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, the memory rite was unstable. Such visions can be influenced by emotion, grief, suggestion. Mason turned so slowly that the courtyard seemed to tighten around him. "Are you asking this pack to believe the moon lied?" Lord Hale's face remained composed, but Claire saw the movement in his throat. "I am asking the pack to avoid rushing into a dangerous conclusion." Vanessa came to stand beside her father, pale but still beautiful, still dressed in practiced sorrow. "We all loved Liana," she said. "That is why this is cruel. A stranger wearing her echo could divide us forever." Claire felt the old instinct to shrink. Vanessa's words were chosen too well. Not loud. Not openly cruel. They gave fearful hearts somewhere to hide. A few wolves murmured uneasily. Mason's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Claire stepped forward. The pups shifted with her, forming a small half-circle at her feet. "I do not remember everything," she said, and her voice carried across the courtyard more clearly than she expected. "I cannot give you a perfect story. I cannot tell you where I was born or why I woke beneath the throne. I cannot even tell you how much of me is Claire and how much of me belongs to the woman you lost." The courtyard quieted. Even the wind seemed to wait. Claire placed one hand over the glowing mark. "But I know this. I did not choose to frighten you. I did not choose to carry grief I do not understand. And I will not let anyone use my missing memories to make me ashamed of kindness." Ruth closed her eyes, as if the words had touched an old prayer. Mason watched Claire with something like awe hidden behind restraint. Vanessa's lips parted, but no sound came at first. Then Lord Hale said, "Pretty words do not change blood law." Mason raised his glowing wrist. "Then let blood law answer." A ripple moved through the pack. Ruth looked alarmed. Mason, the bond confirmation rite has not been used in years. Because no alpha has had a dead mate bond wake in daylight. He looked at Claire, and his voice changed, becoming lower, gentler. It is your choice. No one else's. Claire understood the weight of that. Another test. Another circle of eyes. But this time, Mason was not ordering. He was asking, and in that difference she felt the first true safety she had known since opening her eyes on cold marble. Will it hurt? She asked. Ruth answered honestly. It should not. If the bond is false, nothing will happen. If it is true, the mark will reveal what it protects. Vanessa took one sharp breath. That was the sound Claire had been waiting for. Fear, real and unpolished. Claire looked at Mason. Then I choose it. The ritual required no fire, no basin, no council chant. Only the alpha and the marked soul standing beneath open sky, palms lifted but not touching until both agreed. Mason removed his glove. Across his wrist, the old mate's scar glowed like a silver thread under skin. Claire lifted her hand. For a moment, she hesitated inches from him, close enough to feel warmth, far enough to choose. Mason did not move to close the distance for her. That mattered. Claire placed her palm against his. The courtyard vanished in light. Not blinding, not harsh, but warm as sunrise through curtains. Behind Claire, a white wolf shimmered into view, tall, luminous, its eyes silver blue and ancient with sorrow. Behind Mason, a black wolf appeared, powerful and still, its head lowered not in defeat, but in recognition. The two spirit wolves stepped toward each other, and when their foreheads touched, the silver crescent on Claire's chest unfolded into a fuller mark, no longer just a moon, but a moon cradling a small crown of light. The pack fell to its knees, not because Mason commanded it, but because every old law carved into blackwood stone had just spoken at once. Claire swayed, overwhelmed, and Mason caught her hands without pulling her closer than she allowed. His voice broke in front of them all. I lost Liana to treachery, he said. But I will not lose Claire to fear. Vanessa stepped back, and this time Lord Hale reached for her arm, not to comfort her, but to stop her from running. Ruth saw it. Mason saw it. Claire saw it too, and the new mark on her chest burned brighter, pointing like moonlight toward the guilty. The courtyard held its breath as Claire's new mark brightened toward Vanessa and Lord Hale. It was not a harsh light. It did not accuse with noise or anger. It simply pointed, steady and impossible to ignore, like the moon drawing a path across dark water. Vanessa's face lost the last of its carefully practiced sorrow. Lord Hale's hand remained on her arm, his fingers tense against the cream fabric of her sleeve. For years, he had moved through Blackwood halls as if truth were something that could be folded, sealed, and placed inside a locked drawer. Now every wolf in the estate watched that drawer open. Mason lowered Claire's hands with care, then stepped between her and the council, not to hide her, but to give her room to breathe. Explain, he said. One word. Quiet. Final. Lord Hale straightened, gathering dignity around himself like a cloak. There is nothing to explain. A frightened girl's mark glows after a forbidden rite, and suddenly old servants and grieving wolves see conspiracy in shadows. Ruth moved forward before Mason could answer. Her weathered face was pale, but her voice did not shake. I was the one who found the first missing page. Lord Hale turned toward her. Be careful, healer. I was careful for 3 years, Ruth said, and the sadness in her voice made the courtyard still. I told myself silence protected the pack. I told myself if the Luna's soul truly survived, the moon would bring her home. But silence only gave cowards time to dress betrayal as duty. Claire felt the words settle over her like cold rain. Mason's eyes remained on Ruth, his expression unreadable, but his hands had curled at his sides. What page? He asked. Ruth reached into her medical bag and withdrew a folded piece of parchment, worn soft at the edges. From the old soul-binding records. The ritual used on Lyanna was not meant to destroy her. It was meant to remove her from the bond and hide her light inside another life, far from the throne. Whoever performed it needed access to royal mourning rites, Luna blood records, and the sealed chapel beneath the western wing. Every gaze shifted to Lord Hale. He did not flinch, but Vanessa did. Claire saw it clearly now, the tiny breaks beneath her beauty, the shallow breath, the too fast blink, the fear of someone who had always believed power would arrive before consequence. Mason's voice lowered. You told me the sealed chapel had collapsed during the storm. Lord Hale's silence answered before he did. It was unstable. No, Ruth said. It was hidden. Vanessa suddenly laughed, light and brittle. This is absurd. My family served Blackwood for generations. We protected the throne when grief made you unfit to protect yourself. The courtyard recoiled from the cruelty of it, but Mason did not move. His stillness was more frightening than rage. Claire stepped beside him, her heart pounding. The mark on her chest warmed, and another memory rose, not as a vision that stole the world away, but as a whisper folding itself into the present. White roses. A locked chapel. Vanessa's voice saying, Aluna should be chosen by strength, not sentiment. Claire looked at Vanessa. You hated her because she was kind. Vanessa's eyes snapped to hers. Kindness is not rule. No, Claire said softly. But neither is envy. That reached her. Vanessa's mouth trembled before she pressed it still. Lord Hale turned sharply. Do not answer her. But the command came too late. The moon mark on Claire's chest flared, and the air between them filled with silver mist. This time, the memory did not come from Claire alone. It came from the mark, from the carved stones, from the old laws waking under every foot in the courtyard. The pack saw Vanessa standing in the hidden chapel 3 years earlier, not striking, not screaming, but placing Lyanna's white rose comb into the silver box while Lord Hale spoke the binding words. They saw Lyanna lift her head, sorrowful but unbroken, and send a final spark of herself beyond their reach. They saw Vanessa reach for the fading Luna crown, only for the crown to dim in her hands. The mist vanished. No one spoke. Vanessa's perfect mask had fallen completely. I was supposed to save this pack, she whispered. She made him soft. She made all of you believe gentleness was enough. Mason's face changed then, grief and clarity meeting at last. Gentleness was never weakness, he said. It was the only thing in this house that ever made power worth having. Lord Hale tried to step back, but the council wolves moved aside from him, not violently, not dramatically, simply refusing to shield him any longer. The old laws did the rest. The carved names of the past Lunas glowed along the courtyard walls, and the ground beneath Lord Hale and Vanessa shone with a pale boundary of light. It was not punishment by force. It was judgment by oath. They could not cross it. Their own vows to Blackwood held them where they stood. Ruth exhaled, tears shining in her eyes. The moon remembers what people bury. Claire looked at Vanessa, expecting triumph to rise in her. It did not. What she felt was sorrow, deep and tired. So much pain had come from people mistaking love for a prize and power for a right. The rescued pup leaned against her ankle, warm and alive, and Claire placed a hand on its head. Mason turned to the gathered pack. Lord Hale and Vanessa Hale will be removed from council authority and held under oath guard until the full tribunal. No one will mistreat them. No one will dishonor this court with cruelty. We will not answer betrayal by becoming it. The order moved through the crowd like a breath returning. For the first time, Claire understood why the moon had brought her back not into a throne, but into the body of an Omega. Not to prove she had always been royal. To prove that worth was never born from rank at all. Mason faced her then, and the entire courtyard seemed to fade around the edges. "Claire," he said, her name careful in his mouth, reverent not because of who she had been, but because of who stood before him now. "The pack owes you more than an apology." Claire looked at the wolves who had whispered, doubted, feared, and now watched her with something new. Hope was a fragile thing. So was trust. She did not know if she was ready to carry either. Then the white wolf spirit shimmered faintly behind her, lowering its luminous head as if offering strength without taking her place. Claire lifted her chin. "Then let them begin with the truth," she said. Above the courtyard, the daylight moon brightened, and the veiled portrait in the great hall split its black covering from top to bottom, revealing Liana's painted face smiling with Claire's eyes. The great hall of Blackwood stood open for the first time since the memorial, not as a chamber of grief, but as a place learning how to breathe again. Morning light poured through the high windows, touching the silver wolf carvings, the black marble steps, and the white roses that had once opened for Claire when she was too frightened to understand why. The torn veil lay folded at the base of Liana's portrait, no longer hiding her face. She looked down from the painting with Claire's grey-blue eyes and a smile that did not feel like a ghost's claim, but like a blessing released. Claire stood at the center of the hall in the blue dress Ruth had given her, the rescued pup sitting proudly by her side as if he had appointed himself her smallest guard. Around her, the pack gathered in silence. Not the cruel silence of suspicion. Not the hungry silence of judgment. This was heavier, humbler, filled with all the words people should have spoken before fear taught them to whisper. Mason stood before the throne, but he did not sit. His black coat was unadorned, his crown absent from his brow and resting on the arm of the chair behind him. He looked less like a distant king and more like a man choosing to be honest in the room where he had once broken in secret. Ruth stepped forward first. "Claire Bennet," she said, voice steady despite the tears brightening her eyes, "this pack failed you before it knew you. It looked at your rank and your confusion and called them proof against you. I ask your forgiveness for every silence that made that easier." One by one, the council members bowed their heads. Then the guards. Then the wolves who had recoiled from her mark. Even those who had whispered curse-born lowered their eyes. Claire felt the weight of it, not as victory, but as responsibility. Apologies did not erase fear. They did not return missing years or untangle a soul stitched with another woman's memories. But they could become a first door, and for the first time, the door was open from her side. She looked across the hall at Mason. "I do not want worship," she said softly. "I do not want anyone kneeling because a mark told them to. If this pack wants to honor